How's it going, everybody? It's Young here, and welcome to a Death Stranding news update. The following information comes from a panel that Hideo Kojima did with Greg Miller during RTX Sydney, where Kojima discussed many aspects of his career. In this video, I'll be focusing on information that is directly related to Death Stranding. Most of it was information that Kojima already discussed in the past, but he did provide some new insights and elaborations here and there, so a worthwhile panel all in all. There is a lot to talk about, so without further ado, let's dive right into it. When asked about Death Stranding's theme, Kojima once again reiterated that the main theme of the game is connections. He talked about how, while many things have changed in games over the last 30 years, one thing that hasn't changed is the basic mechanic of players using weapons or sticks in order to push back adversaries. Even with the introduction of online gameplay, most games will have players using sticks to push each other back or to team up and take down enemies together. So with Death Stranding, Kojima intends to use connections to introduce something different. Kojima then once again talked about how mankind's first invention was the stick, specifically noting how this was portrayed in the movie 2001, and how mankind's second invention was the rope. He also reiterated how the stick is often associated with tools to push adversaries away, while the rope is associated with means to pull things close and make connections, and how Death Stranding uses strands to represent connections through things like umbilical cords. Beyond that though, Kojima didn't really provide any new insight as to how any of this will tie into gameplay. He did, however, elaborate further on the game's open world. He has thrown the words open world around a couple times in the past when talking about Death Stranding, but he never mentioned just how open he's planning to make the game. During the panel, he said that once you make an open world game, you just can't stop, so he decided to make Death Stranding fully open world, noting that players can expect a large degree of freedom and that they will be able to do pretty much whatever they want in this world. So yes, folks, it looks like the game won't just feature a few open areas, rather it will feature a fully open world, possibly one that's even more ambitious than MGS5's. After all, MGS5 was Kojima's first venture into the realm of open world games, and I'm sure he's learned a lot from that experience, so it'll be interesting to see where he takes open world gaming with Death Stranding, especially with these mechanics that deal in ropes and connections that he's talking so much about. Now, for anyone worried that the game won't be all that exciting to play, Kojima emphasized that Death Stranding isn't a game where you're tying people up or anything silly like that. He pointed out that people who play AAA games like shooters will quickly find the game's mechanics familiar, intuitive, and easy to get into, especially in the first 2 or 3 hours of the game. However, after 2 to 3 hours of gameplay, Kojima noted that players will start noticing something a little different than they're used to. But even then, there will be action and shooting elements, and players will still be able to use guns, or sticks if you will, to fight back. But there will also be aspects that are unique and unlike anything you've ever seen before in games. That's the aspect of the game that everyone is curious about, but once again, in typical Kojima fashion, he's keeping mum about the topic, likely until he's finally able to show off the game in playable form. Speaking of keeping mum and providing teases, one of the questions that Greg Miller asked Kojima was whether he ever considers he might be showing or teasing too much too early. Kojima's response was that since it takes a while to make games, Kojima's intention with releasing teaser trailers is to get a chance to gauge people's reactions and to connect with the audience throughout the game's development cycle. While Kojima doesn't necessarily take people's feedback and then put them in the game or anything like that, he does listen to people's opinions of what they've seen thus far and gauge their interest. As for what the feedback has been like for Death Stranding's 2 trailers, Kojima is very pleased with the overall positive reactions, and he's especially happy that people are actively wondering about the contents of the trailers and trying to solve its mysteries. Kojima did confirm that the 2 teaser trailers do have vital pieces of the puzzle that, when solved, will give us a more complete vision of what Death Stranding is, and he mentioned he's actually a little afraid that somebody might figure it out, but as far as Kojima knows, nobody has solved the puzzle yet. Is that a challenge, I hear, Kojima? Back to the topic of trailers, another reason that Kojima likes to put out teasers early is to raise the pressure for himself and his team and to keep them pushing forward. Kojima also noted that while most video game trailers are outsourced and CG, both Death Stranding trailers were created in-engine, they both ran in real time, and they were created in studio by Kojima and company, with Kojima himself directing each trailer. That means every trailer can be meaningful and purposeful rather than just a piece of marketing material. Moving along, the conversation eventually shifted to Death Stranding's development progress. Kojima stated that last year they were running multiple tests using the Decima game engine that Kojima Productions had acquired from Guerrilla Games. They particularly worked on adapting and modifying the engine to allow for a much more photorealistic look that Death Stranding is going for compared to the stylized Horizon Zero Dawn. Kojima also explained that any modifications or enhancements that Kojima's team makes are then sent back to Guerrilla, at which point Guerrilla makes their own modifications and enhancements to then send back to Kojima Productions. And it's this constant back and forth relationship in which both studios co-develop the same engine, making improvements at twice the speed. As for how Death Stranding is running on the engine, all Kojima had to say is that the open world is taking form and that you can see very far into the distance. The team is also working on developing the game logic, doing various tests on the different systems within the game, and they're essentially using this year to focus on creating the game around the basic framework that they've already established. So it doesn't look like the game is in playable form quite yet, but a number of systems are being tested and they've got a solid foundation now, which is great to hear. The topic then shifted to Death Stranding's development schedule and release date. Something that Kojima wanted to clarify was the misconception that he's willing to keep pushing back a game to achieve perfection, which he said is far from the truth, stating that he always works within an organized and defined schedule, with most of his game releases falling within that planned schedule. Now, he couldn't say what Death Stranding's schedule is, but Kojima reassured that he knows where the end is, that he has a schedule and a plan to meet that end goal, and that he will continue to attend gaming events like E3 to maintain pressure on himself and his team, and as a constant reminder that he can't run away, he has to complete the game on time. Long story short, Kojima has his ducks in a row when it comes to scheduling and release date, especially now that he's running his own studio with no outside interference. Last we heard, Kojima hinted at a 2018 release window, with the assumption being late 2018, and at this point, with how much progress they've already made, I personally think that sounds very feasible. At the latest, I expect the game to be pushed back to sometime in 2019, but nothing beyond that. Kojima also confirmed during the panel that Death Stranding is definitely a PS4 game. When Greg Miller asked if this game might take so long to develop that it might come out for the PS5, Kojima flat out said, no, Death Stranding will be a PS4 and PS4 Pro game. So this ain't gonna be a Final Fantasy Versus 13 type scenario. Kojima was also asked about the possibility of a sequel, with Greg wondering if he's already thinking ahead and playing with ideas for a Death Stranding 2. Kojima's response was no, he's currently putting everything he has into Death Stranding. He's not thinking about a sequel or leaving anything out for a sequel. However, Kojima did say that if everyone ends up liking Death Stranding, if the game is well received, if the game ends up being popular, and if everyone clamors for a sequel after the game's launch, it's possible he'll think about making one. In other words, he's leaving the door for a sequel open, but he's also not developing Death Stranding with a sequel in mind or under the assumption that there will be a sequel. The last question that Greg Miller asked regarding Death Stranding was if it would be a VR game. Kojima simply responded with, At this time, Death Stranding is not a VR game. Now, the fact that he used the words "at this time" tells me that the idea is still in consideration, or that they are at least still looking into ways of implementing the technology in a way that won't come across as gimmicky or detract from the core experience. But even if they do end up implementing some VR features, I wouldn't expect to be able to play Death Stranding in VR from beginning to end or anything like that. The game doesn't look like it's being built with VR in mind, and I don't think Kojima is the kind of guy who will phone in a feature just for the novelty, especially when forced VR can potentially limit a game's features, mechanics, and other various aspects. A trade-off that Kojima is unlikely to make, knowing the guy. At best, I expect some kind of VR gallery mode maybe, where you'll be able to look around certain in-game locations or cutscenes, or something neat like that. Either that, or Kojima will wait it out and gauge how the technology and its audience base develops over time before he decides to make a separate VR-only game. I feel like that's just the route that he would go for. I feel like if he's gonna make a VR game, he's gonna make it unique to VR and something that's only possible in VR. Not gonna lie, I would be very excited to see what crazy creative concepts Kojima can come up with for VR. Anyway, that's pretty much it for Death Stranding related information that yielded from the RTX Sydney panel. So with that, I would like to end this news update. Thank you for tuning in. Let us know in the comments below what you think about these vague new hints that Kojima shared about his highly anticipated title. And to be further updated on all things Death Stranding, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.